The courtroom was silent, but only for a second. Then, a deep, rumbling laugh filled the air. It came from the judge's bench. Judge Harrison leaned back in his chair, his robe shifting as his chest heaved with amusement. His gavel, still in his hand, trembled as he struggled to keep himself composed. He looked down at the defendant standing before him. Daniel Carter, a tall black man in a simple suit, standing alone without a lawyer. "You're telling me," the judge chuckled, shaking his head, "that you're representing yourself?" A few snickers rippled through the courtroom. Even the prosecutor smirked, arms crossed, waiting for the spectacle to begin. Daniel didn't flinch. He stood firm, his dark eyes steady, his posture unshaken. He knew this moment would come. He had seen it before. The disbelief, the dismissal, the assumption that he was just another man who thought he could out-talk the law. "That's right, Your Honor," Daniel said, his voice calm but firm. Judge Harrison exhaled sharply, still amused. "And you've never been to law school?" "No, sir." "You have no formal legal training?" "No, sir." The judge chuckled again. "Oh, this should be good." He leaned forward, tapping his gavel lightly against the bench. "Well, Mr. Carter, since you insist on embarrassing yourself, by all means, proceed. Let's see what kind of defense you've come up with." Daniel nodded, adjusting his tie. He turned to the jury, his mind sharp, his heart steady. He had spent months preparing for this moment. He had studied night and day, reading every legal book he could find, watching trials, understanding every single word of the law that applied to his case. This was not a game for him. This was his life. And before the day was over, everyone in that courtroom, including the laughing judge, would be left stunned by what he was about to do. 3 months earlier, Daniel had been walking home from his shift at the library when everything changed. It was a quiet evening in downtown Chicago. The streets were still alive with people heading home from work, taxis honking, and the smell of grilled hot dogs drifting from the street vendors. Daniel adjusted the strap of his backpack and stepped off the curb when, "Hey, stop right there." The sharp voice cut through the noise. Daniel turned just in time to see 2 police officers rushing toward him. Their hands were already on their belts, fingers twitching over their holsters. "Hands up," one of them barked. Confused, Daniel raised his hands, his heart thudding. "What's going on?" "Don't move." He didn't. He stayed still as the officers grabbed him, pushed him against the wall, and started searching his pockets. People on the sidewalk stopped and stared, but no one said a word. Daniel's mind raced. He had done nothing wrong. He had just finished a 12-hour shift, helping students and elderly folks find books. Now he was being treated like a criminal. "Officer, Shut up," one of them snapped. "We got a report of a robbery 2 blocks away. You match the description." "What description?" Daniel asked, keeping his voice calm. "Because I just got off work and Before he could finish, cold metal locked around his wrists. "You can explain downtown," the officer muttered, shoving him toward the squad car. Daniel felt his stomach drop. This couldn't be happening. Not to him. As the police car pulled away, he looked out the window at the city he had always called home. The city where he had grown up, worked, helped people every day. And now, in an instant, he was being taken away like a common criminal. At the police station, they asked him questions. Where was he that night? Who could confirm his whereabouts? Did he own a black hoodie? Daniel answered calmly, over and over again. He had been at the library. His manager could confirm it. The security cameras would show him walking out. He didn't even own a black hoodie. But they weren't listening. Hours later, Daniel sat in a cold, gray cell, staring at the ceiling. He had seen this story play out before, with friends, with men who looked like him. The system wasn't designed to listen to him. That's when the thought first struck him. If no one was going to fight for him, he would have to fight for himself. The next morning, they gave him a public defender, an overworked, tired-looking man in a wrinkled suit who barely made eye contact as he flipped through Daniel's file. Look, I'll be honest, the lawyer sighed, rubbing his forehead. They have a witness saying you did it. It's not looking good. But I didn't, Daniel said firmly. The security footage won't matter much if the witness testimony holds up. The lawyer closed the file. Best bet? Take a plea deal. They're offering 3 years. With good behavior, you could be out in 1. Daniel stared at him, stunned. 3 years? For something I didn't do? The lawyer exhaled. If we go to trial, you could face 10. Daniel clenched his fists. This wasn't right. None of it was. He wasn't taking a plea for a crime he didn't commit. And if no one believed in him, He would make them believe. That night, in his tiny cell, Daniel made a decision. He asked for books. Law books. He started reading, learning, studying every word he could. For weeks, he barely slept. He memorized legal terms, watched courtroom footage, and practiced his arguments out loud. If they weren't going to give him justice, he was going to take it himself. The day he stood before the judge and declared he was representing himself, the courtroom had laughed. They wouldn't be laughing for long. Because Daniel Carter was about to prove that he was not just some man in a suit pretending to know the law. He was about to prove that he knew it better than anyone in that room. And when he did, the judge who laughed at him would be left in absolute shock. The laughter in the courtroom faded, but the smirks remained. The prosecutor, a sharp-faced woman named Rebecca Lawson, adjusted her glasses and leaned forward. "Well then, Mr. Carter," she said, her tone dripping with amusement. "Since you're so confident in your abilities, why don't you start by telling us what legal defense you plan to use?" Daniel met her gaze, his expression unreadable. He could feel the weight of every eye in the room pressing down on him, waiting for him to stumble, to make a mistake, to prove them right, that he had no business standing there without a lawyer. He took a slow breath and stepped forward. "Your Honor," he said, addressing the judge with steady confidence, "before we move forward, I'd like to submit a motion to dismiss this case on the grounds of false identification." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge arched an eyebrow. "Oh, and on what basis?" Daniel turned, his voice clear, measured. "Because I have undeniable proof that I was not at the crime scene. If given the opportunity, I can present evidence that contradicts the prosecution's claim entirely." The judge smirked again, tapping his fingers against his desk. "All right, Mr. Carter. You've got my attention. What evidence do you have?" Daniel's heart pounded, but he didn't let it show. He turned to Rebecca Lawson, the prosecutor. "I'd like to request surveillance footage from the Northside Public Library where I work. That footage will show I was there at the exact time the crime took place. Furthermore, I have a signed logbook confirming my checkout time, and my manager is prepared to testify to my presence at work that evening." The room went silent. Even the smirk on Rebecca Lawson's face flickered slightly. The judge leaned back in his chair, tapping his chin. "Well, that's quite a claim," he said. "Ms. Lawson, do you have this footage?" Rebecca hesitated. "I have not reviewed it yet, Your Honor." "Then review it," the judge said firmly. "If this man is telling the truth, then we may have a serious problem." For the first time, Daniel saw something shift in the courtroom. The laughter had stopped completely. People weren't so sure anymore. But this was only the beginning. 2 months earlier, Daniel sat in his cold jail cell, the weight of reality pressing down on him. He had read the plea deal papers over and over again. 3 years. 3 years of his life for something he didn't do. He couldn't do it. He wouldn't do it. So he spent every moment studying. He read case after case. Men who had been wrongfully accused. Men who had been convicted without proper defense. Men who had been forced into plea deals out of fear. He studied the way lawyers spoke, the loopholes they used, the way evidence could be challenged. At first, the guards laughed at him. "What? You trying to be a lawyer now, Carter?" one of them joked, shaking his head. But Daniel ignored them. Late at night, when the prison was silent, he whispered legal terms to himself, memorizing case laws, practicing his arguments. And then, the day came. His public defender visited him again, with the same tired look. "Last chance, Daniel," he said, holding out the plea deal. "Take it, and you can be out in 3 years." Daniel looked at the papers. Then he looked up at the man in front of him. "I'm representing myself." The lawyer scoffed. "That's a mistake." "No. The mistake was thinking I'd let the system decide my fate without a fight." And so, against all odds, Daniel Carter walked into court without a lawyer, ready to prove his innocence. Back in the courtroom, the judge tapped his gavel. "We'll reconvene tomorrow after the prosecution reviews the footage." Daniel exhaled as the bailiff led him back toward the holding cell. For the first time since this nightmare started, he felt something unfamiliar. Hope. But just as he was about to step through the doors, Rebecca Lawson called after him. "Don't get too comfortable, Mr. Carter," she said. "You may think you've found a way out, but this isn't over. Not by a long shot." Daniel turned to her, meeting her glare with calm certainty. "I wouldn't expect anything less." As the doors closed behind him, he knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning of the fight, and he wasn't backing down. The courtroom was packed the next morning. Word had spread. People wanted to see the man who thought he could beat the system without a lawyer. Daniel sat at the defense table, his hands folded. He had barely slept the night before, but he was ready. Judge Harrison entered, his robe billowing as he took his seat. Ms. Lawson, have you reviewed the footage? Rebecca Lawson stood, adjusting her suit. She didn't look as smug as she had the day before. Yes, Your Honor, she said, her voice clipped. And the judge pressed. She hesitated. Daniel watched her carefully. He had spent all night worrying that the footage might be lost, corrupted, or somehow tampered with. But her hesitation told him something else. She had seen it. She knew. The footage does show the defendant at the library during the time of the robbery, she admitted. A collective murmur swept through the courtroom. The judge raised an eyebrow. Then why are we still here? Rebecca cleared her throat. Because, Your Honor, while the footage places Mr. Carter at the library, we have an eyewitness who claims to have seen him at the crime scene. That's enough to proceed. Daniel's jaw tightened. So they weren't giving up. Judge Harrison exhaled, rubbing his temples. All right, let's hear from this eyewitness. The bailiff opened the side door, and a man walked in. Daniel's stomach dropped. He knew that face. The man was Mark Taylor, a former co-worker from the library, someone Daniel had helped get a job months ago. A man he had trusted. Betrayal burned in his chest, but he kept his face unreadable. Rebecca Lawson stepped forward. Mr. Taylor, can you confirm what you saw the night of the robbery? Mark hesitated, then nodded. Yes, I saw Daniel Carter running from the convenience store just after the robbery happened. Daniel's blood ran cold. He wasn't just lying. He was trying to destroy him. Judge Harrison frowned. Are you absolutely sure? Mark nodded, but Daniel caught something. A flicker of unease in his eyes. He was hiding something. Daniel knew he had to act fast. If Mark's testimony stood, the jury could still convict him, even with the footage from the library. He took a deep breath. It was time to prove what he had spent months studying. Standing slowly, he addressed Mark directly. Mr. Taylor, you say you saw me running from the store after the robbery? Mark nodded. That's right. Daniel tilted his head. And where were you standing when you saw this? Mark hesitated. Across the street. Across the street? Daniel repeated. At what time? Maybe 9:30. Daniel nodded, keeping his expression calm. And what was I wearing? Mark blinked. A black hoodie. Daniel turned to the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit B. He gestured to the evidence table, where the police report was filed. According to the report, the suspect was wearing a black hoodie, jeans, and white sneakers. He looked back at Mark. You're sure that's what I was wearing? Mark shifted. Yes. Daniel reached into his bag and pulled out a receipt. Your Honor, this is a receipt from the Northside Library staff store. On the night in question, I checked out wearing a blue dress shirt and khakis. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Daniel held up the receipt. Not only do I have footage proving I was at work, but now we have a witness who claims to have seen me wearing clothes that don't match what I was actually wearing that night. Rebecca shot up from her seat. Objection. The witness may have been mistaken about the clothing. Daniel turned to Mark. Were you mistaken? Mark swallowed hard. Silence. The judge narrowed his eyes. Mr. Taylor, I'm going to ask you again. Are you absolutely certain you saw Mr. Carter that night? Mark shifted in his seat, his face pale. Daniel pressed forward. Or is it possible, he said, lowering his voice, that someone asked you to lie? The tension in the room was suffocating. Mark opened his mouth, but no words came out. His eyes darted to Rebecca. The courtroom went still. Then, all right, Mark blurted out. I lied. Gasps erupted in the courtroom. Judge Harrison banged his gavel. Order. Mark buried his face in his hands. I was pressured, he admitted. I owed someone a favor, and they told me to say I saw Daniel. Daniel's heart pounded. He had done it. The courtroom was chaos. Rebecca Lawson looked furious. The judge rubbed his forehead, looking like he had a migraine. Finally, he let out a sigh. Mr. Carter, it seems this case has taken a turn. Daniel remained standing, his breathing steady. Judge Harrison tapped his gavel. We'll take a recess. But rest assured, I take perjury very seriously. He turned to Rebecca Lawson. Ms. Lawson, we're going to have a conversation about this witness of yours. Daniel exhaled slowly as he was led back to the holding area. He had won this round. But something told him this fight wasn't over yet. Because someone had put Mark up to this. And whoever it was, they didn't want him to walk free. The courtroom doors swung shut behind Daniel, sealing him back into the cold, dimly lit holding cell beneath the courthouse. The moment Mark Taylor confessed to lying, Daniel felt a wave of relief, but it was brief. Because if Mark had been pressured to lie, that meant someone out there was pulling the strings. And that someone wasn't done with him yet. Daniel sat on the bench, his mind racing. His gut told him that Mark had been afraid, not just nervous. There was something deeper going on, something that went beyond a simple favor. A guard knocked on the bars. "Carter, you got a visitor." Daniel looked up, surprised. He wasn't expecting anyone. His family had distanced themselves ever since the arrest, too ashamed or too scared to be involved. The door buzzed open, and Daniel was led into a small, windowless room. Sitting on the other side of the table was a man in a gray suit. Short-cropped hair, sharp blue eyes. There was something about him that immediately put Daniel on edge. The man gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." Daniel hesitated, then slowly pulled out the chair and "Saturday, who are you?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The name's Richard Langston." He folded his hands on the table. "I work with people who prefer to stay unseen." Daniel felt his jaw tighten. "Unseen." Langston leaned forward. "Let me save you some time, Mr. Carter. You're making a lot of noise in that courtroom. People don't like noise." Daniel held his ground. "People? Or you?" Langston chuckled. "You're smarter than they give you credit for." He tapped his fingers against the table. "Let me make this easy for you. Walk away from this case. Take the plea." Daniel clenched his fists under the table. "I already told them. I'm not taking a plea." Langston exhaled dramatically, shaking his head. "See, that's where you're making a mistake. Because if you don't take it, you won't like what happens next." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening me?" Langston smirked. "I'm giving you an option." Daniel stared at him, his mind racing. This wasn't just about him anymore. Someone had gone through the trouble of planting a false witness. And now, this Langston guy was here, trying to intimidate him. Which meant he was close to the truth. Daniel leaned forward, matching Langston's intensity. "You know what I think," he said. "I think you're scared." Langston's smirk faltered just a little. "I think you know this case is falling apart," Daniel continued. "And you're trying to scare me into backing down. But here's the thing. You can threaten me all you want. I'm not going anywhere." Langston's eyes darkened. For the first time, the fake politeness disappeared. "That's a mistake," he muttered. Daniel sat back. "Then I guess we'll see who made the bigger one." Langston stood abruptly, straightening his suit. He buttoned his jacket, then leaned down close. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, Mr. Carter." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving Daniel alone in the empty room. The second the door shut, Daniel exhaled slowly. His hands were shaking. Who was this man? And what was he hiding? One thing was clear. Whoever was behind this wasn't just some local thug. This was bigger than he thought. And if they were willing to go this far to shut him up, then he was getting dangerously close to something they didn't want uncovered. Later that night, Daniel sat in his jail cell, deep in thought. He needed to find the missing piece, the reason why someone was so desperate to pin this crime on him. Then, something clicked. Mark Taylor. He was the key to all of this. If someone had forced him to lie, that meant he had the answer to who was pulling the strings. Daniel needed to talk to him. The next morning, when he was taken back to court, Daniel scanned the room for Mark. But he was nowhere to be found. Instead, Rebecca Lawson stood at the prosecutor's table, her expression unreadable. Judge Harrison entered, tapping his gavel. "Before we resume," he said, looking over his glasses, "I need an explanation." He turned to Rebecca. "Where is your witness?" Rebecca's lips pressed into a thin line. "Your Honor," she said carefully, "Mark Taylor is missing." A hush fell over the room. Daniel felt his stomach drop. "Missing?" Judge Harrison sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Ms. Lawson, are you telling me that the prosecution's key witness has disappeared overnight?" Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. Daniel's pulse pounded. This wasn't a coincidence. Langston had come to him last night, telling him to drop the case. And now, the only witness who could expose the truth was gone. Someone was cleaning up loose ends. Judge Harrison let out a deep sigh. "All right, without a witness, this case is looking shakier by the minute." He turned to Daniel. "Mr. Carter, I assume you have something to say about this?" Daniel stood slowly. "Your Honor, I believe Mark Taylor was pressured into lying. And now that the truth is coming out, someone has made sure he can't testify again." The judge studied him. Rebecca shook her head. "Your Honor, there's no proof of that." Daniel cut her off. "There is proof. He admitted it in court. And now he's missing. The judge sighed heavily. Ms. Lawson, if your key witness is gone, I suggest you reevaluate your case. We'll take a recess. In the meantime, I expect the prosecution to find out exactly where Mr. Taylor is. The gavel slammed down, signaling the break. As the guards led Daniel out of the courtroom, he felt a storm brewing in his chest. This was bigger than a false accusation. Bigger than him. Someone had framed him. And now, they were making people disappear to keep it quiet. Daniel knew one thing for sure. Whoever was behind this, they weren't done with him yet. The door to the holding cell slammed shut behind Daniel. But his mind was moving too fast to care. Mark Taylor had disappeared. Gone. Just like that. Daniel paced the small room, his fists clenching and unclenching. The weight of everything pressed down on him. The case against him was falling apart. But instead of clearing his name, it was like something, or someone, was trying to erase the truth before it could come to light. And if they had gotten to Mark, then who was next? His heart pounded as he replayed his conversation with Richard Langston from the night before. Langston had warned him, told him to take the plea. Had he known this was going to happen? Daniel stopped pacing. No, he wasn't just going to sit here while someone out there pulled the strings. He needed to take control. He needed to find out who was behind this. A guard knocked on the bars. Carter, your lawyer's here. Daniel frowned. I don't have a lawyer. The guard shrugged. Well, someone's here to see you. The door buzzed open, and Daniel was led into the visitation room. He stepped in cautiously, unsure of what to expect. Sitting on the other side of the glass was a woman he had never seen before. She was in her late 30s, sharp-eyed, with dark brown hair pulled into a tight ponytail. Her navy blue suit looked expensive, and the way she sat, calm, composed, made it clear she was used to being in charge. Daniel sat down and picked up the phone. Who are you? The woman gave him a small smile. Claire Donovan, she said. I'm an investigative journalist. Daniel blinked. That was the last thing he expected to hear. Claire leaned forward. I've been following your case, she continued. And I think there's a much bigger story here than a simple robbery. Daniel's grip on the phone tightened. You think someone's framing me? Claire nodded. Not just you. She slid a file toward the glass. Over the last 5 years, there have been a dozen cases just like yours. Black men arrested on false charges, forced into plea deals, and thrown into prison without a fight. The common thread. She tapped the folder. Every single case was prosecuted by Rebecca Lawson. Daniel's breath hitched. You're saying this isn't just about me? Claire exhaled. I think Lawson is part of something bigger. I think she's been pushing false convictions for years. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. He had suspected corruption, but this was a system, a pattern. He stared at the file. How do you know all this? Claire smirked. Because I don't work for the kind of news stations that look the other way. And because I have sources. She glanced around, lowering her voice. And one of those sources? Mark Taylor. Daniel's stomach dropped. Mark talked to you? Claire nodded. 2 weeks ago. He told me he was being pressured to testify against you. That someone had threatened him. Daniel swallowed hard. Do you know who? Claire's expression darkened. No. But I know this. Mark was scared. He wanted out, but he didn't know how. She hesitated. And now he's missing. A cold wave washed over Daniel. Mark had tried to do the right thing. And now he was gone. Claire's voice broke through his thoughts. I can help you, Daniel. But I need your help too. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? She leaned in. If we're going to take this down, we need proof. Something undeniable. And you're in the middle of it. You have access to people I don't. Daniel hesitated. I don't know anything. Yes, you do. Claire interrupted. Langston. Daniel's heart nearly stopped. How do you? Claire smirked. Like I said, I have sources. She paused. He came to you, didn't he? Daniel nodded slowly. Last night. He told me to take the plea. Claire's eyes gleamed. That means he's feeling the heat. And that means we have leverage. Daniel exhaled. What do you need me to do? Claire's voice was sharp. You need to get Langston to talk. Daniel's eyebrows shot up. And how exactly am I supposed to do that? Claire smirked. You're smart, Daniel. You got Rebecca's witness to break on the stand. Do the same thing to Langston. She paused. Get him to slip up. Get him to admit what's really going on. Daniel ran a hand over his face. This was insane. He was just trying to prove his innocence. Now he was in the middle of a conspiracy. But deep down, he knew Claire was right. If he didn't do something, this would keep happening. More innocent people would be sent away. More lives would be ruined. He took a deep breath. Okay, he said finally. I'll do it. Claire smiled. Good. She slid a burner phone under the table. Hide this. If anything happens, call me. Daniel hesitated, then slipped the phone into his pocket. Claire stood. I'll be watching, Daniel. Be careful. With that, she turned and walked out, leaving Daniel alone with his thoughts. He exhaled. His world had just flipped upside down. He had come into this courtroom to defend himself. Now, he was about to take down something much bigger than his own case. And he had no idea how deep the corruption really went. As the guard led him back to his cell, one thought echoed in his mind. If Langston was willing to play dirty, then so was he. And the next time they met, Daniel wouldn't be the one caught off guard. Daniel sat in his holding cell, his heart pounding in his chest. The burner phone Claire had given him was tucked deep into the waistband of his pants, out of sight. The weight of it felt heavier than it should, as if it carried more than just a way to call for help. It carried a choice. Did he go through with this? Did he really try to trick Langston into revealing the truth? Or did he play it safe and hope the case fell apart on its own? No, safe wasn't an option. Mark Taylor had tried to do the right thing, and now he was missing. Daniel wasn't about to let the same thing happen to him. The door buzzed open, snapping him out of his thoughts. A guard stepped inside. Carter, you got another visitor. Daniel's stomach tensed. He already knew who it was. He was led into the visitation room again. Just like before, Richard Langston sat at the table, his face unreadable. But this time, Daniel wasn't the same man who had walked in the night before. He sat down and picked up the phone. I was wondering when you'd come back, he said casually. Langston smirked. You didn't seem like the type to take good advice. Daniel leaned forward. And you didn't seem like the type to panic. But then again, your star witness disappeared overnight. Langston's smirk flickered. Just for a second. But Daniel caught it. Good. He was already getting under his skin. Langston exhaled, tilting his head. Let me give you one more chance, Carter. Take the plea. 3 years is better than 10. Daniel chuckled. See, that's the thing. I don't think you actually care about my sentence. Langston arched an eyebrow. Is that so? Daniel nodded. I think you care about something else. I think you care about what happens when people start asking questions. When people like Claire Donovan start digging into cases you thought were buried. Langston's jaw tightened. Got him. Daniel smirked. Yeah, that's right. I know all about her. And I know she's onto something big. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. And here's the part you should be worried about. Langston, I'm not scared of you. Langston's expression darkened. For the first time, the cold confidence wavered. Daniel pressed forward. You think you can make people disappear? You think you can shut me up? That's not going to happen. Langston exhaled slowly. Then he chuckled. You're playing a dangerous game, Carter. Daniel tilted his head. So are you. Langston shook his head, amused. You know what I admire about you? Your guts. Most men in your position would be begging for a deal. Daniel shrugged. Most men in my position don't know the law like I do. Langston's smirk returned, but his eyes were colder now. Then let's see how well you handle what happens next. The way he said it sent a chill down Daniel's spine. This wasn't over. Langston stood up, straightening his suit. I'll see you in court, Mr. Carter. Daniel didn't look away. Looking forward to it. Langston left, and the door clicked shut behind him. Daniel let out a slow breath, his fingers tightening into fists. He had rattled him. That much was clear. But Langston wasn't done. And whatever he had planned next, Daniel had to be ready. The next day in court, the atmosphere had changed. The smirks were gone. The quiet laughter had disappeared. People weren't so sure anymore. Judge Harrison took his seat and cleared his throat. Ms. Lawson, since your witness is missing, do you have any further evidence against Mr. Carter? Rebecca Lawson hesitated. She looked different today, less confident, less certain. Finally, she exhaled. Your Honor, the prosecution is still reviewing the case. But at this time, we request a continuance. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Daniel stood. Objection, Your Honor. Judge Harrison raised an eyebrow. On what grounds, Mr. Carter? Daniel turned to face Rebecca. The prosecution has had months to build this case. Their key witness was proven unreliable. Now they want more time? That's not justice. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably. Judge Harrison sighed. I have to agree, Ms. Lawson. The prosecution had every opportunity to prove their case. He looked at Daniel. Mr. Carter, are you requesting a dismissal? Daniel took a slow breath. This was it. Yes, Your Honor. The courtroom held its breath. Judge Harrison looked at Rebecca. Ms. Lawson? Rebecca opened her mouth, then closed it. She had nothing left. The judge sighed. I'll make my ruling after lunch. Court is adjourned. The gavel slammed down. Daniel exhaled. He was one step away from freedom. But as he turned, he caught sight of Langston standing at the back of the courtroom. And the look in his eyes sent a cold shiver down Daniel's spine. This wasn't over. Not yet. And something told him. Langston still had one last move to play. Daniel sat alone in his holding cell, staring at the wall. He should have felt relief. The prosecution was falling apart. Judge Harrison was considering a dismissal. Freedom was within reach. But something didn't feel right. Langston had been too calm, too sure of himself. And Daniel had learned one thing about men like him. They never walked away unless they had another plan. The guard knocked on the bars. Carter, back to court. Daniel stood slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. Whatever was coming, he had to be ready. As he walked back into the courtroom, he immediately knew something was wrong. The energy had shifted. The room felt different. Judge Harrison was already seated, his expression unreadable. Rebecca Lawson stood at the prosecution table, and this time, she didn't look unsure. She looked confident. Daniel's stomach turned. Something had changed. Judge Harrison tapped his gavel. Court is now in session. Before we proceed with the defense's request for dismissal, Ms. Lawson, I understand the prosecution has new evidence. New evidence? Daniel's hands clenched into fists. Rebecca Lawson stood, smoothing out her suit. Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution would like to submit a newly uncovered piece of evidence. Security footage from a traffic camera near the crime scene. Daniel's breath hitched. What? His mind raced. He knew he hadn't been anywhere near that store. If there was new footage, then it had to be fake. Rebecca turned toward the bailiff. Please play the footage. A screen lit up at the front of the courtroom. Daniel's stomach dropped as the grainy footage played. A dark figure ran down the street. The timestamp matched the time of the robbery. The suspect was tall, lean, and wearing dark clothing. Then, the camera caught a partial view of the man's face. And Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. Because the face, it looked like him. A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Daniel's heart pounded as he turned to Rebecca Lawson. She wasn't smirking, but there was a gleam in her eyes, a look that told him she thought she had won. Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses, peering at the screen. Mr. Carter, do you have an explanation for this? Daniel swallowed hard, forcing himself to stay calm. This was what Langston had meant. This was his final move. The man in the video, it wasn't him. But it was close. Close enough to make people doubt. Close enough to give the prosecution what they needed. Daniel took a slow breath. They had faked evidence before. They had pressured witnesses. Now, they were using technology to create something that looked real. But Daniel had spent months studying the law. And if they wanted to play dirty, then he was ready to fight back. He stepped forward. Your Honor, I'd like to request an immediate forensic analysis of this footage. Rebecca scoffed. Mr. Carter, are you suggesting the footage isn't real? Daniel turned to her, his voice steady. I'm suggesting that I was at work when this footage was taken. And if I'm right, then this video has been altered to frame me. The murmurs grew louder. Judge Harrison leaned forward. And how do you plan to prove that? Daniel turned to the judge, his mind working at lightning speed. There are experts who can analyze video evidence, detect deep fakes, inconsistencies, and tampering. If this footage is real, they should have no problem proving it. The judge frowned, deep in thought. Rebecca crossed her arms. Your Honor, this is a waste of time. It's not, the judge interrupted. Mr. Carter has the right to challenge the evidence against him. He sighed and tapped his gavel. I'm granting the request. The footage will be reviewed by an independent forensic expert. Daniel felt a surge of hope. Rebecca's jaw tightened. Langston, sitting in the back, didn't flinch. But Daniel saw it. The slightest flicker of frustration. He had forced them to play their final card. And now, all he had to do was prove it was a lie. Judge Harrison sighed. Until we have the results, this court is adjourned. The gavel slammed. As Daniel was led out of the courtroom, he caught Langston's gaze. The older man smirked. And Daniel knew. This fight wasn't over. Not yet. But now, he had one last chance to expose the truth. And he wasn't going to waste it. Daniel sat on the hard bench of his cell, staring at the ceiling. His mind was racing, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had faced setback after setback, but this was the most dangerous move yet. The video footage was a lie, and if he didn't prove it in time, it could send him away for years. He exhaled slowly. No matter how real it looked, no matter how many people believed it, the truth was still on his side. Now, he just had to find a way to make the world see it. The door buzzed, and a guard stepped in. "Carter, you've got another visitor." Daniel frowned. "Claire?" As he was led into the visitation room, his heart pounded. If anyone could help him fight this, it was her. But when he stepped inside, his stomach dropped. It wasn't Claire. Rebecca Lawson sat on the other side of the glass, her arms crossed. Daniel narrowed his eyes. He hadn't expected this. Slowly, he sat down and picked up the phone. "You must be getting desperate." Rebecca smirked. "I could say the same about you." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Let me guess. You came to make me an offer." Rebecca tilted her head. "I came to do you a favor." Daniel scoffed. "Funny. That's what Langston said before he tried to threaten me." Rebecca's smirk faded slightly. "Listen, Daniel. This case, it's bigger than you think." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I already know that." Rebecca sighed, glancing around as if to make sure no one else was listening. Then she lowered her voice. "The people I work for, they don't lose. You think this video is fake? Maybe it is. But it won't matter. By the time you prove it, they'll have something else lined up. Another witness. Another piece of evidence." She leaned in. "They are not going to let you walk away from this." Daniel studied her carefully. For the first time, she didn't look like the cocky prosecutor he had faced in court. She looked tired, worried, scared. He exhaled. "Why are you telling me this?" Rebecca hesitated. "Because I've been where you are." Daniel froze. She looked down, her fingers tapping against the table. "I was just starting out when I took my first case like this. I thought I was doing the right thing. They showed me evidence, told me the defendant was guilty. I trusted them." She swallowed hard. "Then I found out the truth. And by then, it was too late." Daniel felt his pulse quicken. Rebecca Lawson, the woman who had been trying to put him away, was admitting she knew the system was corrupt. And yet, she had stayed. She had played along. "Why?" he asked quietly. Rebecca exhaled. "Because they made sure I couldn't leave." She met his eyes. "And if you keep pushing, they're going to do the same to you." Daniel clenched his fists. "So that's it. You just do their dirty work." Rebecca's expression hardened. "I don't have a choice." Daniel shook his head. "There's always a choice." She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I came here to warn you. They're not going to stop, Daniel. If you fight this, you won't just lose the case. You'll lose everything." Daniel leaned forward. "Then why are you still here?" Rebecca hesitated. "Because I need to know if you can actually win." Daniel's heart pounded. For the first time, he saw it. Rebecca Lawson wasn't just another prosecutor trying to put him away. She was someone trapped in the same system. And maybe, just maybe, she was looking for a way out. "I will win," Daniel said firmly. "And when I do, you'll have to make a choice. You can keep protecting them, or you can help me bring them down." Rebecca studied him for a long moment. Then she exhaled and stood up. "Good luck, Daniel." She turned and walked out. Daniel watched her go, his mind spinning. She was still working for them, still playing their game. But now, he knew something they didn't. Rebecca Lawson wasn't fully on their side, and that might be the advantage he needed. That night, Daniel paced his cell, going over everything in his mind. The video was fake. He knew it. Claire knew it. But proving it was another battle. Suddenly, a knock on the bars made him jump. The guard smirked. "Carter, you've got another visitor." Daniel frowned. "At this hour?" The guard shrugged. "Guy says he's a lawyer." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. "Langston." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Tell him I'm not interested." The guard chuckled. "Oh, I don't think he's the type to take no for an answer." The door buzzed open, and Daniel was led into the darkened visitation room. Langston was already sitting at the table, his hands folded neatly in front of him. He looked as calm as ever. Daniel sat down, his muscles tensed. Langston picked up the phone, smirking. "Nice try today." "That was cute." Daniel didn't respond. Langston leaned in. "Here's the deal, Carter. We both know what happens next. The judge? He's going to review the footage. Maybe he finds something suspicious. Maybe he doesn't." Langston shrugged. "But in the end, it won't matter. You're going to prison. And if you keep pushing, you won't just end up behind bars." Daniel felt his breath hitch. Langston's smirk widened. "You'll end up like Mark Taylor." A cold shiver ran down Daniel's spine. He gripped the phone tighter. "What did you do to him?" Langston tilted his head. "That depends. Are you willing to make a deal?" Daniel's heart pounded in his ears. Langston was making his final move. And now, Daniel had to decide. Did he fight back? Or did he risk losing everything? Daniel gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. Langston's words echoed in his mind. You'll end up like Mark Taylor. He forced himself to keep his expression neutral, but his heart was pounding. Langston was taunting him, testing him, and Daniel wasn't going to break. Slowly, he leaned forward, meeting Langston's icy blue gaze. What did you do to him? Langston chuckled, shaking his head. It's not about what I did, Carter. It's about what you were going to do. Daniel didn't respond. He knew better than to take the bait. Langston smirked. You think you're smart. You think you've got this all figured out. But let me tell you something. He lowered his voice, his smirk fading. This isn't just about you. You're standing in the way of something much bigger. And people like me? We don't lose. Daniel stared at him, unflinching. Is that why you had to fake evidence? Langston's expression darkened. Careful. Daniel smirked. Oh, I'm just getting started. Langston exhaled, as if he were dealing with a stubborn child. You have two options, Carter. You take the deal. We make this all go away. You plead guilty to a lesser charge. You serve a little time, and you live to see another day. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. And if I don't? Langston's smirk returned. Then you won't just lose the case. You'll lose everything. A silence stretched between them. Then, Langston leaned back. Think about it. I'll be seeing you. With that, he stood and walked out, leaving Daniel gripping the phone, his pulse racing. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was war, and Langston had just made his next move. Daniel lay awake in his cell that night, staring at the ceiling. The fear was there, creeping at the edges of his mind. Mark Taylor had tried to come clean, and now he was missing. Langston was powerful, connected. He could manipulate the system, erase evidence, make people disappear. But Daniel wasn't going to let him win. Not without a fight. He pulled the burner phone from its hiding spot and dialed the only number stored in it. Claire picked up on the second ring. Tell me you have something. Daniel exhaled. Not yet. But Langston just offered me a deal. Claire was silent for a moment. Then, that means they're desperate. Daniel frowned. Or they're setting me up for something worse. Claire sighed. Either way, we need to get ahead of them. I'm working on getting that footage analyzed, but it's going to take time. Daniel clenched his fists. Time. That was the one thing he didn't have. Claire hesitated. Daniel, be careful. If Langston is willing to go this far, we don't know what else he's capable of. Daniel nodded, even though she couldn't see him. I will. But deep down he knew. This fight was about to get even more dangerous. The next morning, Daniel was escorted back into the courtroom. The tension in the air was thicker than ever. Rebecca Lawson was already seated, and for the first time, she looked rattled. Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses, clearing his throat. Before we proceed with the forensic analysis of the security footage, the prosecution has informed me of an update in the case. Daniel's stomach turned. Rebecca stood, her hands gripping a folder so tightly her knuckles were white. She exhaled. Your Honor, the prosecution has received new information regarding a potential witness. Daniel frowned. A witness? Rebecca hesitated, then turned toward the back of the courtroom. Your Honor, I'd like to call Mark Taylor to the stand. The room gasped. Daniel's heart stopped. Mark Taylor was alive. The doors opened, and Mark walked in. He looked disheveled, his eyes darting around the room like a man who hadn't slept in days. Daniel studied him carefully. Something was wrong. Langston's words echoed in his head. You'll end up like Mark Taylor. Judge Harrison nodded. Proceed. Rebecca cleared her throat. Mr. Taylor, can you confirm that you were, in fact, present the night of the crime? Mark swallowed. Yes. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Rebecca continued. And can you confirm that you saw the defendant, Daniel Carter, at the scene of the crime? Silence. Mark's fingers twitched. He glanced toward the back of the courtroom. Daniel followed his gaze. Langston was sitting in the last row, his arms crossed. Watching. Mark swallowed hard. Then, yes. Daniel felt like the floor had just been ripped out from under him. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Rebecca straightened. Just to clarify, you are confirming that Daniel Carter was at the crime scene? Mark nodded stiffly. Yes. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. This was wrong. Mark was lying, again. But this time, it wasn't just fear in his eyes. It was something else. Something worse. Langston had gotten to him. Judge Harrison exhaled, rubbing his temples. Mr. Carter, do you have any questions for the witness? Daniel stood slowly. His mind was racing. Mark had already admitted in court that he was pressured into lying. And now, he was suddenly back, reversing his testimony? It didn't add up. Daniel took a step forward. "Mr. Taylor," he said, keeping his voice steady, "are you testifying under your own free will?" Mark's eyes flickered. "Yes." Daniel narrowed his gaze. "Then why did you disappear?" Mark hesitated. I was scared." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Who told you to change your testimony?" Rebecca objected. "Leading the witness." Judge Harrison sighed. Sustained. Daniel swallowed his frustration. He had to change tactics. He turned back to Mark. "When we last spoke, you admitted that you lied under pressure. You told this court that you didn't see me at the crime scene." Mark's fingers twitched. Daniel stepped closer. "So what changed?" Mark's throat bobbed as he swallowed. He glanced toward Langston again. Daniel followed his gaze. Langston gave the faintest shake of his head. Mark's breathing quickened. Daniel took one last step forward, lowering his voice so only Mark could hear. "They got to you, didn't they?" Mark's eyes darted to him. A long silence stretched. Then, his lips parted. Before he could say another word, the courtroom doors burst open. A uniformed officer ran in, his face pale. He rushed to the judge's bench, whispering something urgently. Judge Harrison's expression darkened. He cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take an immediate recess. Court is adjourned." The gavel slammed down. Daniel turned to Mark, but before he could move, two officers were already escorting him away. Langston stood, buttoned his suit, and walked out. Daniel's mind raced. Something had just happened. Something big. And whatever it was going to change everything. The courtroom buzzed with confusion as people whispered among themselves. Something had happened. Something big. Daniel was led back to his holding cell, his mind spinning. Mark Taylor had been about to say something important. But before he could, the courtroom had erupted into chaos. And Langston had walked out like he already knew what was coming next. Daniel clenched his fists. He needed to find out what had just happened. A guard appeared at his cell door. "Carter, you got a call." Daniel frowned. "A call?" The guard shrugged. "Don't ask me. You're lucky to get one." Daniel followed him down the hall, his pulse pounding. He was led into a small room where a phone was mounted on the wall. The guard nodded for him to pick it up. He did. "Daniel," a familiar voice said. His stomach flipped. "Claire." She exhaled sharply. "Listen to me. Something just went down at the police department. A detective, Michael Benson, was found dead in his car an hour ago." Daniel's breath hitched. "What?" "It's all over the news," Claire continued. "They're saying it was a heart attack, but my sources say he was looking into cases tied to Rebecca Lawson's office." Daniel's fingers tightened around the phone. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone was tying up loose ends. Benson was one of the few cops who actually tried to expose corruption in the department, Claire said. "If he was digging into your case, that means he found something someone didn't want getting out." Daniel swallowed hard. "And now he's dead." Claire was silent for a beat. "We don't have much time. They're cleaning house." Daniel's thoughts raced. If Benson had found something about his case, then that meant there was evidence out there. Evidence that could prove he was being framed. But Langston and his people were erasing everything. Daniel took a shaky breath. "We need to find out what Benson knew." Claire hesitated. "That's going to be dangerous." Daniel exhaled. "I don't have a choice." Claire was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I'll see what I can find." Daniel nodded. "And Claire?" "Yeah. Be careful." She let out a dry laugh. "I should be telling you that." The call ended, and Daniel set the phone down, his mind whirling. Someone had just killed a detective to protect this case, which meant they weren't done coming after him. That night, Daniel lay awake in his cell. He had been fighting to prove his innocence, but now he was fighting for something bigger. This wasn't just about his case anymore. It was about justice, about every innocent person who had been silenced. The next morning, he was escorted back into court. The tension in the room was heavier than ever. Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses, looking exhausted. "Before we proceed, I have been informed of some troubling news." Daniel held his breath. "The sudden death of Detective Michael Benson has raised questions about ongoing investigations," the judge continued. "As a result, I have requested an independent review of all cases currently before this court." A ripple of murmurs swept through the room. Rebecca Lawson paled. "Langston?" He didn't flinch. Judge Harrison sighed. "In light of these developments, I am postponing my ruling on Mr. Carter's request for dismissal." He turned to Daniel. Mr. Carter, do you have anything to say? Daniel stood slowly, meeting the judge's gaze. Yes, Your Honor. I believe Detective Benson had evidence that could prove my innocence. But now, that evidence is gone. The judge frowned. Are you suggesting foul play? Daniel clenched his jaw. I'm suggesting that Benson knew something. And now he's dead. Silence. Judge Harrison glanced at Rebecca. Ms. Lawson, does your office have any knowledge of Detective Benson's investigation? Rebecca hesitated. Langston watched her closely. Then, finally, she exhaled. I don't know. Daniel studied her carefully. She was lying. And she was scared. Judge Harrison tapped his fingers on his desk. Then I suggest you find out. He turned to the courtroom. Court is adjourned. The gavel slammed down, and the session ended. Daniel exhaled. The walls were closing in. He had forced the judge to take notice. He had forced Rebecca to second-guess herself. And Langston? For the first time, Daniel saw something in his eyes. Not amusement, not confidence, but something close to anger. Daniel had rattled him, and that meant Langston was about to strike back. Hard. As Daniel was led away, he knew one thing for certain. He had just put himself in more danger than ever before. And the next move would decide everything. The walls of Daniel's cell felt smaller that night. The air was heavier. The silence too loud. Something was coming. Langston wasn't the kind of man who sat back and waited for things to fall apart. He controlled the board. And Daniel had just made a move he wasn't supposed to. Now, the question wasn't if Langston would retaliate. It was when. And Daniel had a sinking feeling that one was tonight. The guard's footsteps echoed down the hall. The clang of the metal door opening made Daniel sit up. Carter, the guard said, not looking him in the eye. Let's go. Daniel frowned. Where? The guard didn't answer. Daniel's gut twisted. Every instinct screamed at him. This wasn't routine. But he didn't have a choice. Slowly, he stood and stepped forward. The hallway was dimly lit as the guard led him through the maze of cells. But then, they turned left. Not toward the courtroom. Not toward the visitors' area. The opposite direction. Daniel's stomach dropped. They weren't taking him anywhere official. They were taking him somewhere else. Somewhere he wasn't supposed to come back from. His pulse pounded. Where are we going? No answer. The hallway stretched out ahead. Fewer cameras. No other inmates. Panic clawed at his throat. This was it. Langston was making his move. Daniel scanned the walls, searching for something, anything, that could give him an opening. His hands clenched into fists. If they thought he was going down without a fight, they were wrong. Just as they rounded a corner, Daniel moved. He lunged, twisting his body and ramming his shoulder into the guard's chest. The impact sent them both crashing into the wall. The guard grunted, stumbling, but Daniel didn't stop. He grabbed the man's wrist, yanking him forward and slamming him against the bars of an empty cell. The guard cursed, struggling, but Daniel was already moving. Run. He sprinted down the hall, his breath coming in sharp gasps. He didn't know where he was going. All he knew was that if he stopped, he was dead. Footsteps thundered behind him. Stop. Daniel kept running. Left. Then right. His mind raced, piecing together the layout of the prison. He needed an exit. A hiding spot. Something. Up ahead, a door. He shoved through it, slamming it shut behind him. Darkness. Storage room. No windows. No exits. Daniel's heart pounded as he pressed against the door, listening. Footsteps slowed outside. Then, voices. I told you to make it quiet, someone hissed. Langston. Daniel's blood ran cold. He held his breath, pressing closer to the door. A second voice, deeper. He's smart. Almost got away. Langston exhaled sharply. Find him. And when you do, a pause. Make sure he doesn't make it to court tomorrow. Daniel's chest tightened. They weren't just trying to scare him. They were going to kill him. The footsteps moved away. Daniel's mind raced. He had minutes, maybe less, before they realized where he was. His only chance. Get to Claire. She was the only one still fighting for him. He reached for the burner phone in his waistband. Hands shaking, he flipped it open and dialed. 1 ring. 2. Then, Daniel. Claire's voice was urgent. Daniel whispered, They're trying to kill me. Silence. Then, where are you? Prison, he rasped. They tried to take me somewhere. I ran. I don't have long. Claire cursed under her breath. Listen to me. Stay hidden. I'll get you out. How? Trust me. The line went dead. Daniel's breath came fast. He clutched the phone, forcing himself to stay still. Seconds passed. Then minutes. His heartbeat slammed against his ribs. Footsteps. Closer. Daniel pressed into the shadows, his fingers curling into fists. The door handle jiggled. Then, bang. The door flew open. Light poured in. Daniel flinched, raising his arms. Carter. A different voice. Not Langston. A Real guard. Daniel blinked, chest heaving. The judge wants to see you. Daniel's pulse pounded. What? The judge? Now. The guard stepped back. Let's go. Daniel hesitated. This could still be a trap. But what choice did he have? Slowly, he stepped forward. As he was led out of the storage room, he glanced down the hall. No sign of Langston. But Daniel knew. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Judge Harrison sat at his desk, looking exhausted. Papers were scattered everywhere. A news broadcast played on a muted screen in the background. He rubbed his temples. Mr. Carter, do you have any idea what's happening outside these walls? Daniel swallowed hard. No, Your Honor. Judge Harrison sighed. He grabbed a remote and turned up the volume. The news anchor's voice filled the room. Breaking news. Evidence has surfaced linking multiple high-profile convictions to falsified testimonies and planted evidence. At the center of the scandal, Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Lawson and her former mentor, Richard Langston. Daniel's breath hitched. The screen cut to a grainy security clip. Langston, speaking to someone in a dark alley, passing them a folder. Then another image, Rebecca Lawson, standing outside a courthouse, looking pale. Judge Harrison exhaled. It seems your case is no longer just about you, Mr. Carter. Daniel sat frozen. Claire. She had done it. She had exposed them. Judge Harrison leaned forward. I just received word that Rebecca Lawson is willing to testify. Daniel's heart pounded. Rebecca was flipping? The judge sighed. Given the developments, I am making a decision. He met Daniel's eyes. Effective immediately, I am dismissing your case. Silence. Daniel's brain struggled to process the words. Dismissed. It was over. He was free. The judge tapped his gavel. This court is adjourned. Daniel let out a shaky breath. After months of fighting, after being laughed at, beaten down, hunted, he had won. But as he was led out of the courtroom, a thought lingered in his mind. Langston was still out there. And something told him. This wasn't over yet. Daniel stepped outside the courthouse, the bright afternoon sun hitting his face for the first time in months. The fresh air, the sound of traffic, the distant chatter of people, it all felt surreal. He was free, but he wasn't safe. Not yet. Claire stood by the courthouse steps, arms crossed, eyes scanning the street like she expected trouble. When she saw him, she let out a sharp breath of relief. You're alive, she said. Daniel smirked. You sound surprised. Claire shook her head. Not surprised. Just impressed. Daniel exhaled, his eyes drifting across the street. He had won his case, but that didn't mean the fight was over. Not when men like Richard Langston were still walking free. Where's Rebecca? He asked. Claire's expression darkened. Under protective custody. She gave a statement implicating Langston in falsifying evidence, but she hesitated. Daniel frowned. But what? Claire sighed. Langston disappeared an hour ago. No one can find him. Daniel's stomach tightened. That wasn't a good sign. Langston wasn't the kind of man who ran. If he had vanished, it meant he was planning something. Daniel scanned the street again, feeling the weight of unseen eyes. He's not done. Claire nodded. No, he's not. They stood in silence for a moment, the reality settling between them. Daniel had fought the system and won. But the system didn't go down that easily. Claire shifted, pulling something from her bag. Here. Daniel took it. A flash drive. Claire smirked. Evidence. Names. More cases like yours. Everything Langston and his people tried to bury. Daniel turned the drive over in his palm. And what do we do with it? Claire exhaled. We burn the whole thing down. Daniel looked up, meeting her gaze. He had spent months fighting just to survive. Now, he had the chance to do something bigger. To make sure no one else had to go through what he did. To make sure Langston never did this to anyone again. Daniel clenched his jaw. It wasn't over. But for the first time, he was the one in control. Claire smirked. So, you ready for the real fight? Daniel exhaled, slipping the flash drive into his pocket. He glanced back at the courthouse one last time. Then, he turned toward the city. I was born ready.